Ethan Roberts thought he had the perfect life, a stable job, a loving wife, and a future full of promise. But everything came crashing down when he uncovered a devastating betrayal by his wife, Hannah, shattering their 7-year marriage. Struggling to make sense of her choices and his own heartbreak, Ethan embarks on a journey of self-discovery, facing unexpected confrontations and emotional turning points. When a call for help pulls him back into Hannah's troubled world, tensions reach a boiling point, forcing Ethan to make life-altering decisions. What happens next will leave you questioning love, forgiveness, and the power of starting over. My name is Ethan Roberts, and I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin where life was simple and predictable. By the time I was 25, I had everything I thought I wanted: a steady job as an auto mechanic, a cozy house on the edge of town, and the love of my life, Hannah. We met at a 4th of July picnic when I was 19. She was all bright smiles and sunflower dresses, and from the moment we talked, I was hooked. Hannah was the kind of woman who lit up a room just by walking into it. She worked as a teacher at the local elementary school, and the kids adored her. Hannah and I married young, a year after we met. Our wedding was small, held in the backyard of her parents' house. I remember the way she looked that day, barefoot and laughing as she danced with her little nieces, the train of her dress tucked up so she wouldn't trip. We promised each other a life full of love and trust, and for a long time, it felt like we were living in a fairy tale. But fairy tales don't usually prepare you for the parts of life that are less glamorous. By our 7th anniversary, life had settled into a comfortable routine, maybe a little too comfortable. I'd get up at 6 a.m., head to work at the shop, and come home around 5. Hannah's days were filled with lesson plans, PTA meetings, and occasional late nights grading papers. Somewhere in the middle of it all, we seemed to stop seeing each other the way we used to. Conversations became shorter, our evenings quieter. It wasn't bad exactly, just different. Around this time, Hannah started spending more time out of the house. At first, it was for school-related events or coffee dates with friends. I didn't think much of it. She was sociable, and I'd always admired that about her. But after a while, I noticed she'd sometimes come home later than usual. Her excuses vague. "Oh, I stayed back with some of the other teachers to finish decorations for the spring recital," she'd say. Or, "Megan wanted to talk about her husband, so we grabbed an extra coffee." I'd nod, pretending not to notice the way she avoided my eyes. I didn't want to seem paranoid or controlling, so I let it go. After all, we'd built our marriage on trust, right? But deep down, a small voice kept whispering that something felt off. I ignored it. One Friday night in late March, Hannah told me she was going to a girls' night with Megan and some other teachers. She'd been unusually cheerful all day, humming to herself as she got ready. She even put on her favorite dress, the red one she wore on special occasions, and a new pair of heels I hadn't seen before. When I asked where she got them, she just smiled and said, "Oh, I picked these up on sale last week." As she headed out the door, I kissed her on the cheek. "Have fun," I said, and she flashed me a bright smile before walking to the car. That smile lingered in my mind long after she'd left, a mix of warmth and something else I couldn't quite name. I spent the rest of the evening on the couch, half watching a basketball game and half scrolling through my phone. Around midnight, I texted her, "Hey, you good getting late?" The dots appeared for a moment, then disappeared. A few minutes later, her reply came, "All good, just wrapping up, be home soon." She didn't come home until nearly 2 a.m. When I asked how the night went, she smiled and said, "Oh, it was great. Megan's stories about her kids were hilarious." Then she slipped into the bedroom to change, leaving me sitting there, feeling like I'd asked the wrong question. The next few weeks passed in much the same way. Hannah seemed distant, but happy, like she had a secret she wasn't ready to share. I told myself it was just a rough patch. Every couple has them. And I tried harder to reconnect. I started bringing home flowers, cooking her favorite meals, even surprising her with a weekend trip to a cabin by the lake. She appreciated it. Or at least she said she did. But the distance between us remained. Then, one night, I got a call from Megan's husband, Tom. We weren't exactly close, but we'd had a few beers together at barbecues and game nights over the years. Tom sounded uneasy, like he wasn't sure if he should be calling. "Hey, Ethan," he said, after some small talk. "This might be nothing, but Megan mentioned that she and Hannah haven't had a girls' night in weeks. Just thought you'd want to know." My heart sank. I didn't know what to say, so I mumbled something about how maybe Megan just forgot. But the truth hit me like a freight train. If Hannah wasn't with Megan, where was she? And more importantly, who was she with? The next day, I couldn't focus at work. My mind kept replaying the past few months, every late night and vague excuse suddenly taking on a new meaning. When I got home, I decided to check her phone. Not something I was proud of, but the need for answers outweighed my guilt. Her phone was locked, of course, but she'd left her laptop open on the kitchen table. I hesitated for a moment, then clicked on her email. What I found there confirmed my worst fears. Hidden among school memos and online shopping receipts were messages from someone named Mark. The emails were casual at first, jokes about staff meetings and funny anecdotes about the kids. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. The messages became more personal, more intimate. Phrases like, "I can't wait to see you again," and "last night was incredible," burned into my brain. I sat there staring at the screen, my chest tight with anger and disbelief. I wanted to storm out of the house, to confront her the moment she walked through the door, but a part of me knew that wouldn't solve anything. I needed a plan, a way to get to the truth without letting my emotions take over. When Hannah came home that evening, I acted normal, or at least I tried to. She seemed oblivious to my inner turmoil, chatting about her day like everything was fine. I nodded along, my mind racing with questions I wasn't ready to ask. As I sat across the dinner table from Hannah that night, every word she said felt like a puzzle piece I was desperately trying to fit together. She talked about her day, about the kids at school, about a fundraiser for the library. But my mind was elsewhere. I kept replaying those emails in my head. Who was Mark? How had this started? And, most importantly, how had I not seen it sooner? I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked her how the girls' night with Megan had gone a few weeks ago. She paused mid-bite, her fork hovering in the air, and gave me a tight smile. "Oh, it was nice. We just had some wine and caught up on life." There it was, the lie. I could see it plain as day now. Her avoidance of eye contact, the way she rushed through her answer. It stung more than I expected, even though I already knew the truth, but I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. Over the next few days, I kept my suspicions to myself, watching her more closely than ever. She seemed happy. Too happy, in fact. I noticed how she'd hum to herself while doing the dishes, how she'd take extra care with her appearance before heading out, how her phone seemed to be glued to her hand whenever she thought I wasn't looking. One evening, while she was in the shower, I took another look at her laptop. This time, I searched for Mark's name in her calendar. My stomach dropped when I saw several recurring events marked with nothing but a single letter. M. Dinner dates, weekend plans, even a few afternoons during the school week. My hands shook as I closed the laptop, my heart racing with anger and confusion. The breaking point came a week later. She told me she was going to the library to work on lesson plans, but something didn't sit right. Her tone was too casual, her excuses too rehearsed. I decided to follow her. I felt sick doing it, like I was betraying my own principles, but the nagging voice in my head wouldn't let me rest. I trailed her car at a safe distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Instead of heading toward the library, she drove to a small bistro on the edge of town. I parked a block away and watched as she stepped out of her car, her red dress swaying as she walked toward the entrance. Moments later, a man emerged from the bistro and wrapped her in a hug. He was tall, with broad shoulders and an easy confidence that immediately set my blood boiling. They laughed as they walked inside together, oblivious to the storm raging in my chest. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to decide what to do. Should I confront them right there, march in and demand answers in front of everyone? Or should I wait and confront Hannah at home, away from prying eyes? I chose the latter, though every second of waiting felt like torture. When she came home that night, I was sitting on the couch, her laptop open on the coffee table. She froze when she saw it, her smile faltering. "Ethan," she said cautiously, "what's going on?" "Who's Mark?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. The color drained from her face, and she took a step back, as if physically recoiling from the question. "Ethan, I can explain," she started, but I cut her off. "Don't bother. I followed you tonight, Hannah. I saw you with him." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw regret. But then, she straightened her posture, her expression hardening. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're right, I've been seeing someone." It was like a punch to the gut. Hearing her admit it made everything feel real in a way it hadn't before I stared at her, waiting for her to say something. Anything that might make it hurt less. But all she did was stand there, tears streaming down her face as she avoided my gaze. "How long?" I finally asked, my voice cracking. "How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, her hands wringing nervously. "A few months," she said quietly. "It started as just talking. I didn't mean for it to go this far, Ethan, I swear." I wanted to believe her God. I wanted to believe her so badly, but the weight of her betrayal crushed any hope I had left. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What did I do wrong, Hannah? Was I not enough for you?" She shook her head, fresh tears falling. "It's not about you," she said. I felt so lost, so trapped in this life and Mark. He made me feel alive again." Her words were like daggers, each one slicing deeper than the last. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. "Alive," I repeated bitterly. "You think I don't feel trapped sometimes? You think I don't have moments where I wonder if this is all there is? But I didn't cheat on you, Hannah. I didn't run off to find someone else." The room fell silent, the weight of our shattered marriage hanging heavy between us. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she said, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted to hurt you." But she had hurt me more than she could ever understand, and no amount of apologies could fix what was broken. That night, I slept on the couch, though slept might be a generous term. My mind wouldn't stop racing, replaying every moment of our relationship and trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. By morning, I'd made up my mind I couldn't stay. Not like this. When she came downstairs the next day, I was already packing a bag. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Ethan," she said, her voice laced with panic. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving," I said simply. "I need time to think, to figure out what happens next." She reached for my arm, her touch hesitant. "Please, Ethan, don't do this. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, or—" "No," I said firmly, pulling away. "You made your choice, Hannah. Now I have to make mine." I walked out the door without looking back, my heart heavy but my resolve firm. I didn't know where I was going or how long I'd be gone, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living a lie. For those of you watching, relationships aren't always as perfect as they seem. They take work, trust, and honesty. 3 things I thought we had. If you've ever been in a situation like this, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one. After I left the house, I stayed at a motel on the edge of town, just far enough from everything familiar I needed space. Space to think, to breathe, to figure out what came next. But space didn't erase the questions swirling in my mind, or the ache in my chest every time I thought about Hannah with Mark. The first few days were a blur. I tried to distract myself with long drives and endless cups of bad coffee. But no matter where I went, the pain followed. I thought about calling Hannah, about hearing her side of things, but every time I picked up the phone, I stopped myself. What was there to say that we hadn't already said she'd made her choice, and now I had to figure out mine? Then, one evening, just as the sun was setting, I got a text. It was from Hannah. 3 words. We need closure. I stared at the screen for what felt like forever, torn between anger and the faint hope that closure might bring some kind of peace. After all, we'd shared 7 years together. 7 years of love, of laughter, of memories that still felt too close to forget. I typed out a short reply. Tomorrow, same cafe at 5. The next day, I sat in a corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee and trying to steady my nerves. When Hannah walked in, she looked different, nervous, unsure. A far cry from the confident woman who used to light up every room. She slid into the seat across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Thanks for meeting me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak for a moment. We just sat there, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. Finally, she broke it. Ethan, I don't know where to start, she said, her voice cracking. I know I hurt you. I know I messed up. But I never stopped caring about you. Caring? I said, the bitterness in my voice surprising even me. You call this caring, Hannah lying to me, sneaking around, throwing away everything we built. She flinched, but didn't look away. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said. I need you to know that it wasn't about you. It was about me. I felt lost for so long, and I didn't know how to tell you. I leaned back, my arms crossed. So, what, Mark, was your solution? Cheating was your way of finding yourself. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't have an excuse, Ethan. I was selfish, and I made the wrong choices, but I need you to know that it didn't mean I didn't love you. The words hung in the air, heavy with everything left unsaid. Part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that maybe, just maybe, we could fix what was broken. But another part of me, the part that had spent sleepless nights replaying her betrayal, knew better. I can't do this, Hannah, I said finally, my voice trembling. I can't keep pretending like we can just go back to the way things were. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost reached out to comfort her. But I stopped myself. This was the path she had chosen, and now, we both had to live with the consequences. As I walked out of the cafe, a strange sense of relief washed over me. It wasn't the closure I'd hoped for, but it was enough to take the first step toward moving on. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into work, taking on extra shifts and keeping my mind occupied. The guys at the shop noticed something was off, but they didn't push. They just handed me a wrench and let me lose myself in the hum of engines and the smell of grease. But no matter how hard I worked, the memories of Hannah lingered. Every time I passed our favorite diner or heard a song we used to dance to, the pain came rushing back. I wondered if she was happy with Mark, if she'd found whatever it was she'd been looking for. And though I hated to admit it, I wondered if she missed me too. Then, one afternoon, I got a call that changed everything. It was from Megan, Hannah's best friend. We hadn't spoken since everything went down, so I was surprised to see her name pop up on my phone. I hesitated before answering. "Ethan," she said, her voice urgent. "I know this is probably the last thing you want to hear, but I think you need to know what's going on." My heart sank. "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself. "It's Mark," she said. "He's been seeing someone else Hannah found out, and she's a mess. She doesn't know I'm calling you, but I thought you should know." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. A part of me felt vindicated, like some twisted sense of justice had finally been served. But another part of me, a part I didn't want to admit existed, felt sorry for her. "Thanks for telling me," I said finally, my voice tight. "But I don't think there's anything I can do about it." "I'm not saying you should," Megan said quickly. I thought you deserved to know the truth." As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, even a flicker of pity for Hannah. But more than anything, I felt a sense of finality. Whatever we'd had was truly over, and there was no going back. As the days passed, I couldn't shake Megan's call from my mind. Learning that Mark had betrayed Hannah didn't bring the satisfaction I thought it might. Instead, it left me feeling hollow, like a wound I'd been nursing had been reopened. No matter how much I tried to focus on work or distract myself, the thought of Hannah, alone, heartbroken, and dealing with the consequences of her choices, kept creeping in. But I reminded myself that this wasn't my problem anymore. She had made her decisions, and I had made mine. Still, life had a way of pulling you back into situations you thought you'd left behind. A week later, I was locking up the shop late one evening when I saw her car parked outside. She was sitting in the driver's seat, her head resting on the steering wheel. At first, I thought about ignoring her, just walking to my truck and driving away. But something about the way she looked, defeated, small, like the weight of the world had finally crushed her, stopped me. I tapped on her window, and she jumped, quickly wiping at her face. When she rolled the window down, her red, tear-streaked face was a stark reminder of the woman I used to know, the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I'm the last person you want to see right now, but I didn't know where else to go." I sighed, leaning against her car door. "What do you want, Hannah?" She hesitated, biting her lip like she was trying to find the right words. I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything, for lying to you, for breaking your trust, for all of it. You didn't deserve any of that." Her apology caught me off guard. I had expected excuses or justifications, not this raw, unfiltered remorse I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. "And Mark?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why I cared. Her face crumpled, and she looked down at her hands. "He's gone. He was never who I thought he was. I was stupid to believe he could give me something I was missing. I should have seen it sooner." I felt a strange pang of pity for her, even as anger simmered beneath the surface. "Hannah, I don't know what you want from me," I said finally. "You hurt me in ways I can't even put into words, and now you're here, asking for... what? Forgiveness." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm not asking for anything, I just needed you to know that I regret everything. Losing you was the biggest mistake I've ever made, and I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of our shared history. I wanted to tell her to leave, to go home and figure out her own mess. But the part of me that had loved her for so long couldn't let her leave like this. "Let's talk," I said after a long pause, stepping back from the car. "Not here. There's a diner down the road." She nodded, her relief palpable, and followed me in her car. We sat in a booth in the corner of the nearly empty diner, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. For the first time in what felt like forever, we talked. Not as husband and wife, but as two people who had been through the ringer and come out the other side. Hannah told me everything, how she'd felt lost and unappreciated, how her conversations with Mark had started innocently enough, and how they'd quickly spiraled into something she couldn't control. She admitted that she had been searching for something to fill the void inside her, only to realize too late that what she'd been looking for wasn't out there. It was in herself. I listened, letting her get it all out, but I didn't sugarcoat my own feelings. I told her how betrayed I'd felt, how her actions had shattered my trust and left me questioning everything about our marriage. I told her about the nights I spent lying awake, wondering if I'd been blind to the signs or if she'd simply chosen to hide them from me. By the time we finished talking, it was nearly midnight, and the waitress was giving us subtle hints that it was time to wrap it up. As we walked back to the parking lot, the silence between us felt different, less heavy, more like the calm after a storm. "Ethan," she said softly as we reached our cars, "I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't expect us to go back to what we were, but I hope someday you can find it in your heart to let go of the anger you deserve peace, even if it's not with me." I didn't respond right away. Her words echoed in my mind, and for the first time in months, I felt a small flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Closure. "I don't know what the future holds, Hannah," I said finally, "but I hope you find peace too." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled. A small, bittersweet smile that spoke of pain, regret, and maybe, just maybe, hope. As I drove home that night, I realized that the weight I'd been carrying for so long had started to lift. It wasn't gone completely, but it was lighter, more manageable, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. For those of you watching, life doesn't always give us neat, happy endings. Sometimes, closure isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about finding the strength to move forward, even when the pieces don't fit together the way they used to. If you've ever been through something like this, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one. After my conversation with Hannah at the diner, I thought that would be the end of it, that we'd go our separate ways, both trying to pick up the pieces of our lives. But as it turned out, life wasn't done throwing curveballs at me. A week later, I got a call from Megan again. This time, her voice was frantic. "Ethan, I hate to bother you, but I think something's wrong with Hannah. She hasn't been answering her phone or showing up to work. I stopped by her place, and it looks like she hasn't been there for days." I felt a surge of worry, despite everything. As much as I wanted to keep my distance, the thought of her in trouble made my chest tighten. "Did you call the police?" I asked. "Not yet," Megan said. "I thought maybe you'd know where she might be." I didn't. But as I hung up the phone, I remembered something Hannah had once told me during one of our long drives. There was a cabin in the woods about an hour out of town, a place her family used to visit when she was younger. It had been her favorite spot to escape to when life got overwhelming. If she wasn't at home, it seemed like a good place to start. The drive to the cabin was tense. The winding roads, the overcast sky, and the growing sense of unease made every mile feel longer than the last. When I finally arrived, I saw her car parked out front, covered in a thin layer of dust. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Panic set in, and I tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. Inside, the cabin was dimly lit by the fading evening light streaming through the windows. Hannah was sitting on the couch, her knees pulled up to her chest, and her arms wrapped around them. She looked up when she heard me, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Ethan," she said, her voice cracking, "what are you doing here?" "Megan called me," I said, stepping inside. She was worried about you, and honestly, so was I. She let out a shaky breath, her eyes filling with tears. I just needed to get away, she said. Everything's been so overwhelming, Mark. The fallout at work, losing you. I didn't know how to handle it. Her vulnerability caught me off guard. This wasn't the same Hannah who had been so confident in her choices, so sure of herself. This was a woman who had hit rock bottom, and as much as I wanted to stay angry at her, I couldn't help but feel a pang of compassion. I sat down across from her, keeping a respectful distance. Hannah, you can't just disappear like this. People care about you. Megan cares about you. She looked down at her hands, silent for a moment. Do you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air, heavy and complicated. Did I still care about her? After everything we'd been through, after all the pain and betrayal, did I still have room in my heart for the woman who had broken it? The answer wasn't as simple as I wanted it to be. I don't know, I said honestly. But I can't just turn it off, Hannah. We were together for 7 years. That doesn't just disappear. Her lips trembled, and she nodded, as if she'd expected that answer. I'm sorry, Ethan, she said again. For everything, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the faint rustling of leaves outside. Eventually, I stood up. Come on, I said, extending a hand. Let's get you out of here. She hesitated, but eventually took my hand. As we walked to her car, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't angry anymore. The hurt was still there, but the anger had been replaced by something else. A sense of closure, maybe even acceptance. In the weeks that followed, Hannah started going to therapy, trying to sort through the mess of emotions and choices that had brought her to this point. I kept my distance, focusing on my own healing. But we kept in touch, just enough to know we were both moving forward. Then, one evening, I got a call from her. This time, her voice was calm, almost peaceful. Ethan, I just wanted to thank you, she said, for coming to the cabin, for listening, for everything. I don't think I could have started to heal without that. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to brush it off, to tell her she didn't owe me anything. But another part of me felt a quiet sense of pride. Maybe in some small way, I had helped her find her way back to herself. Take care of yourself, Hannah, I said finally. You deserve that. You too, she replied. Goodbye, Ethan. It was the last time we spoke, and as I hung up the phone, I felt a strange mix of emotions, sadness, relief, and a sense of finality that had been missing before. Months passed, and life slowly started to feel normal again. I threw myself into work, reconnected with old friends, and even started dating again. It wasn't easy, but it felt good to open myself up to the possibility of love, to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could find happiness again. For those of you watching, life doesn't always go the way we plan. Sometimes, the people we love let us down, and sometimes we let ourselves down. But the important thing is to keep moving forward, to learn from the pain and use it to grow. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday night. I had just finished locking up the shop when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but something compelled me to answer. Ethan, it's Megan, the voice on the other end said, her tone frantic. It's Hannah. She's in trouble. My stomach dropped. What do you mean, trouble? What's going on? She's at Mark's place, Megan said. I don't know the full story, but she called me crying, and then the line went dead. I don't know what to do. Adrenaline surged through me. Despite everything that had happened between us, The idea of Hannah in danger was unbearable. "Text me the address," I said, already heading to my truck. "I'm on my way." The drive was a blur of rain-slicked roads and pounding thoughts. Megan's text came through, and I followed the GPS to a neighborhood I didn't recognize. An upscale development with perfectly manicured lawns and houses that screamed wealth. Mark's place was at the end of a cul-de-sac, its massive windows glowing faintly in the stormy night. As I parked across the street, I noticed Hannah's car in the driveway, its headlights off but the interior light faintly visible. My heart raced as I approached the house, the sound of the rain muffling my footsteps. I knocked on the door, hard enough to get attention but not so much as to seem threatening. No response. I tried again, louder this time, and heard faint movement inside. A moment later, the door swung open, and there he was. Mark tall, broad-shouldered, and looking far less charming than the man I'd seen at the bistro months ago. His expression was a mix of irritation and confusion. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, his voice sharp. "I'm here for Hannah," I said, keeping my tone steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "Where is she?" Mark's lips curled into a smirk. "She's fine. Go home, buddy. This has nothing to do with you." I didn't budge. "I'm not leaving until I see her." He stepped forward, his posture menacing. "Listen, you've got about 5 seconds to get off my property before—" "Ethan!" Hannah's voice cut through the tension. She appeared behind him, her face pale and tear-streaked. "It's okay, I'm coming." Mark turned, glaring at her. "You're not going anywhere." It was like a switch flipped inside me. I stepped forward, my voice firm. "She said she's leaving." For a moment, I thought he might swing at me. His fists clenched, his jaw tightened, but then he stepped back, muttering something under his breath. Hannah slipped past him, clutching a small bag, and I led her to my truck. As we pulled away, I could feel Mark's eyes burning into the back of my head. Once we were a safe distance away, I glanced at Hannah. She was staring out the window, her hands trembling in her lap. "What happened back there?" I asked. She hesitated, her voice shaky. He wouldn't let me leave. I went there to talk, to try to get closure, but he got angry. He started saying all these things, blaming me for everything going wrong in his life. When I tried to leave, he grabbed my arm and..." She trailed off, her voice breaking. I tightened my grip on the wheel, my anger rising again. "Did he hurt you?" "No," she said quickly. "He just scared me." That's when I called Megan. I exhaled, trying to calm myself. "You're safe now," I said. "That's all that matters." We drove in silence for a while, the rain tapping softly against the windows. Finally, Hannah spoke. "I'm sorry, Ethan. For everything. For dragging you into this. For what I did to us. For all of it." I didn't respond right away. Her apology felt genuine, but it was hard to process everything in the heat of the moment. "We've been through a lot," I said finally. "But right now, let's just focus on getting you somewhere safe." I dropped her off at Megan's house, making sure she was settled before I left. Megan pulled me aside as Hannah went inside, her expression a mix of gratitude and concern. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." "She's been through enough," I said. "She needs to stay away from him for good." Megan nodded. "I'll make sure of it." As I drove home that night, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. For months, I had been caught in a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. But seeing Hannah in that vulnerable state had shifted something in me. I didn't know what our future held, if we'd ever truly find peace or closure. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were both finally heading in the right direction. The following days were quiet, almost eerily, so Hannah stayed with Megan, focusing on therapy and rebuilding her life. I kept my distance, knowing she needed space to heal. Meanwhile, I started making changes of my own. taking up new hobbies, reconnecting with old friends, and even signing up for a local hiking group. It wasn't much, but it felt like progress. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from Hannah. Her voice was calm, steady. "Ethan, I just wanted to thank you again for everything." "You don't have to thank me," I said. "I just did what anyone would have done." "Not everyone would have," she said softly. "You didn't have to help me, not after everything I did. But you did, and that means more than I can say." There was a pause, and I could hear the emotion in her voice. "I know we can't go back to the way things were," she continued. "But I hope someday we can be okay, even if it's just as friends." I didn't know what to say. The idea of being friends with Hannah felt strange, almost impossible. But there was something genuine in her words, a desire for peace, for closure. "We'll see," I said finally, "one step at a time." Months turned into seasons, and life slowly found a new rhythm. Hannah moved out of Megan's and into a small apartment across town. We ran into each other occasionally, at the grocery store, at community events, and while the encounters were brief, they were cordial. The bitterness that had once defined our interactions was gone, replaced by a quiet understanding. For me, the future felt wide open. I didn't know where life would take me, but for the first time in years, I felt ready to embrace whatever came next. And for those of you watching, remember, life is messy and people are complicated. But even in the darkest moments, there's always a chance for redemption, for healing, growth, and new beginnings. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one. As time moved on, the wounds from my past with Hannah began to heal. It wasn't an overnight transformation, and it certainly wasn't easy. But day by day, I found myself letting go of the anger and resentment I had held onto for so long. I think it's because, in the end, I realized that holding on to that pain was only hurting me. And while I'll never forget what happened, I learned how to move forward. Hannah and I didn't become best friends or anything close to that, but we found a way to exist in the same town without the weight of our shared history dragging us down. Occasionally, we'd exchange polite smiles or brief conversations at the grocery store or community events. There was a peace between us, an understanding that we'd both grown in our own ways, and that the love we once had served its purpose. Hannah continued with therapy and started focusing on herself in a way she hadn't before. She even began volunteering at a local women's shelter, using her own experiences to help others going through tough times. Megan told me once, over a casual coffee, that she seemed happier than she'd been in years, content in her independence, and proud of the life she was rebuilding. And honestly, hearing that brought me more peace than I expected. As for me, I started exploring who I was outside of my old marriage. I picked up hiking and joined a local group that met every weekend through them. I discovered a love for photography, capturing landscapes that seemed to reflect my own journey. Weathered, imperfect, but full of quiet beauty. The act of finding new passions, new interests, was like rediscovering parts of myself I'd forgotten were there. One particularly bright Saturday morning, I met someone new on one of these hikes. Her name was Claire, and she had a laugh that could light up the whole trail. We started talking that day, about everything from the best spots to watch the sunrise to our favorite books. Over time, those conversations turned into coffee dates, then dinners, then a relationship that felt easy and natural in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. Claire wasn't perfect, none of us are, but she was honest, kind, and fiercely supportive. She didn't try to erase my past or compete with the memories of Hannah. Instead, she embraced my story as part of who I was, and as our relationship grew, I realized that this was what love was supposed to feel like. Not a battle to hold on to something slipping away, but a partnership that lifted us both higher. Hannah found her own happiness too. I heard through Megan that she eventually moved to a new town closer to her sister. She started teaching again and even began writing a book, something she'd always dreamed of doing. She reached out once before she left, just to say goodbye and to thank me again for being there for her when she needed it most. We left it at that. A quiet, mutual respect for the paths we'd chosen. Looking back, I see now that everything that happened, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the messy aftermath, taught me lessons I wouldn't have learned otherwise. It taught me the importance of self-respect, of forgiveness, and of letting go of what no longer serves you. It taught me that people make mistakes, and while those mistakes can hurt, they don't have to define you. The final moments of this chapter of my life weren't dramatic or earth-shattering. They were quiet, reflective, and filled with a sense of hope for the future. I'd rebuilt my life, found new love, and discovered a strength within myself that I hadn't known was there. And for that, I'm grateful, even for the pain that brought me here. For those of you watching, I hope this story reminds you that no matter how dark things may seem, there's always a way forward. Whether it's finding closure with someone who hurt you, rediscovering your passions, or opening your heart to new possibilities, life has a way of surprising you if you let it. If you enjoyed this story or found it relatable, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this one. Your support means the world to me, and I can't wait to share more with you in the future. Until next time, take care and remember, every ending is just the beginning of something new.